All right, so this is going to be a video response to a comment I received on one of my videos. As you recall, I went up to Wigan last weekend to campaign on behalf of my party, Restore Britain, for the upcoming Makerfield by-election, the results for which we're going to find out sometime later today. And I attended the rendezvous meetup point outside Haydock Racecourse, and I recorded some film footage of myself just panning my camera around, seeing how many people had showed up. There were at least 1,000 who turned up. There were even some Telegraph reporters who stopped me for an interview quickly. And most people who saw the video I put up were generally supportive and encouraging, but not everyone was. Some people didn't like the video. And one such individual was this chap by the name of Daniel Watson 7915. I'm going to show you the comment thread right here on the screen so you can see. So this conversation starts when Daniel Watson leaves me a comment just saying fascist. And it's like, okay, this is basically how a lot of YouTube comment arguments start. I mean, typically the way it works is you go on other people's videos and you see somebody, and if they express an opinion that you don't approve of, or there's something off about them that you don't like, typically what a lot of people will do, I'm not necessarily condoning it, but this is what behavior on the internet is like, you know, and they drop a comment, you know, just insulting them, calling them names. It's pretty clear, based on the way he writes, I believe this guy is a left-wing socialist. But anyway, he drops me a comment calling me a fascist, and I reacted, calling him a bug-eyed nerd. I mean, here's what he looks like. You guys can judge for yourself. But then, honestly, I wasn't expecting the comment thread to go beyond that. I was just expecting that to be the beginning and the end of it, and we would all just carry on with our day. Except, he left me a comment afterwards in response that was just so beautiful. It was just so spectacularly ignorant and so woefully out of touch. Just riddled with inaccuracies and so full, replete with unfounded assumptions about myself, about my opinions, and about my personal life, that I did a double take upon reading it. I was sitting down, writing a long essay-style comment in response, until I thought, at some point, midway through, I thought, you know what? Fuck this. I'm actually going to have to make a video response to this, because this comment is so egregious, it deserves a video response. So I don't usually do this, but I've decided to do this anyway, just for you, Daniel Watson. And I'm making this video, and I want other people to watch this video because I want others to understand who I am, where I come from, and what my views are specifically. So, and I'm going to show you the comment on screen so you guys can see where I'm at. So, I'm going to read out each individual point he makes, and I'm going to address it and respond to it in real time. So, Daniel Watson says the following: "You support a party which promotes hate and relies on ignorance. I'd much rather be a nerd than be a fascist. And not gonna lie to you, buddy, I've seen your videos, you ain't exactly the anti-nerd yourself." So where to begin with that? First of all, it is not hateful to be opposed to mass immigration. Mass immigration is an invasion and ethnic cleansing by any other name. Anyone with a modicum of historical literacy can understand this. Because over the course of human history, mass immigration is what happens to a conquered tribe that's been invaded and conquered by a stronger tribe. Take the history of England, for instance. England never used to be an Anglo-Saxon country that spoke English. It used to be inhabited by Celtic, Brittonic peoples. But what happened was, after the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Romans left, and the British Isles were filled with squabbling Celtic tribes who were all vying for dominance over one another. So what happened was, the Celtic prince who ruled over the land invited these foreign mercenaries from these three tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, who lived in modern-day Denmark and North Germany. And there were these two warlords in particular called Hengist and Horsa. They invited them here as foreign mercenaries to quell the rebellions and fighting. And over time, these foreign mercenaries, they grew larger in number, they settled in large numbers, and they decided they were going to take over because they had the means, they had the manpower, and their enemy was disunited and divided. And so what happened over the next few centuries is they took over. The Anglo-Saxons took over vast territorial regions of modern-day England and established clans. And the long-lasting impact of which is that, to this day, England is no longer a Celtic-speaking country of Celtic peoples. The Celts were basically, their entire culture was wiped out. There are still some traces of Celtic Brittonic culture, like in Cornwall, where there are people who speak Cornish. The Isle of Man, they have a dialect called Manx. Scotland and Wales, the Anglo-Saxons weren't able to take over those regions. And, of course, Ireland. But anyway, that is the grim history of Anglo-Saxon England. And that's what happens. And it's spectacular when you consider why they came over in the first place. They came over as immigrants. They came over to do a job as foreign mercenaries. So in a way, it's like we are witnessing history repeat itself time and time again. And over time, they got so big and so powerful, they consumed all of the land and its resources. They massacred the Celtic tribes who lived there, and they mated with the female Celts, and they created the modern-day English. Anyway, anyone with a cursory understanding of history knows that that is basically what happens in the context of a war. Mass immigration is an invasion. So it's not ignorant. It's certainly not ignorant to point this out. And it's not hateful either. Because leftists, make no mistake about this, all leftists understand the truth of what I'm saying deep down. They don't disagree with the core principle of what I'm advocating, that mass immigration is an invasion, that it results in severe psychological dislocation and psychic damage for the locals who live there. It completely transforms the culture of a country that is subjected to it. And if leftists were intellectually honest enough about themselves to admit it, they would see that they actually have a lot in common with us. Like, take this for example. I know what leftists are like. I'm familiar enough with a lot of their talking points. I know that on the one hand, while they go on and on about racism and white privilege and xenophobia and racist white gammons and how they will virtue signal about how much they love immigration and how our country would be just so dull without it. On the other hand, when it comes to British expats moving over and settling in large numbers in other parts of the world, like in Benidorm, Spain, or in Qatar, in the United Arab Emirates, they have a real problem with that. They talk about how British expats in Benidorm, they refuse to integrate. They refuse to speak the language. They disrespect the local culture. They work during the siesta. They don't attend mass. Or they go over to Qatar and they drink alcohol. And women walk around without being dressed in traditional Islamic attire, both of which are severely forbidden in Islamic culture. So they don't integrate, and they don't respect the local culture. And honestly, I have to say, as somebody who's right-wing, not a fascist, by the way, just somebody who's right-wing and conservative, I don't disagree with this. I tell you this, if the Spanish people who live in Benidorm are so sick and tired of Brits coming over and completely terraforming their countries to make it suit their own tastes, and they want to see the Brits mass deported, I'd be perfectly supportive towards that. You know, I've got no love in my heart for British people trying to colonize the rest of the world. We've already colonized the world. We don't need to do it again. I've got nothing against the Spanish, and I've got nothing against the Arabs who live in UAE either, should it come to pass that they demand the same thing. So I am consistent on this issue. And another example of this, of how I know that leftists are being disingenuous when they claim not to understand right-wing talking points, is consider the way they talk about Israel and Palestine. Because we all know how it worked. We all know how the Israelis are committing a slow ethnic cleansing against the Palestinians. We know that they confiscate parcels of Palestinian land, and they have settler families move in large numbers and buy houses and live in properties on the West Bank. These are called illegal settlements. And leftists, when they see this, they rightly condemn this as genocide and ethnic cleansing. And I don't disagree. I don't think this should be allowed. I think Israel seriously needs to be held in check. I recognize the right of Palestine to exist. And what about Ukraine and Russia? Right now, as I speak, the Ukrainians are in, their 4th or 5th year of an all-out war for their survival and independence against a neighboring foreign aggressor whose president literally said on that Tucker Carlson interview that he doesn't recognize their country's right to exist, that Ukraine's not a real country. It's an artificial territorial administration created by the Soviets on a whim. The Russians have been open about this. They want to denazify Ukraine. They want to Russify the Eastern Donbass. They want to annex the Eastern Donbass and incorporate it within Russian territory. And the Ukrainians, let me say this, the Ukrainians have every right to fight back and resist this. And leftists understand this too. It's not like they don't understand. They literally have Ukraine flag emojis in their Twitter bio over this. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, leftists, you already agree with what we say. You agree with the core principle, the core fundamental argument that mass immigration is typically happens in the context of a war. It's ethically unjustifiable. It's an invasion and ethnic cleansing by any other name. You understand this, and yet, despite all this, despite your sympathy and compassion for the underdog in Palestine, in Ukraine, and in Benidorm in Spain, suddenly, when it comes to white working-class Brits who are losing their jobs, who are losing their towns and communities and their culture due to foreign mass immigration from the third world, suddenly all of your compassion and sympathy evaporates. I find that extraordinary. It is really, it defies belief how they can be intellectually dishonest and how they can justify this to themselves. But anyway, as I've said from the beginning, it is not hateful to point this out. What we want is not unreasonable. We want a reversal to the decades worth of mass migration that has impacted our country since the late 90s, or I would argue further than that, since the end of the Second World War, because it's caused irreversible psychological damage to this country. It's caused disorientation and confusion. It causes division among people. Nobody knows who they can trust. There have been entire studies done on this, like one Robert J. Putnam, who produced a paper on how mass immigration and diversity reduces social trust. It doesn't just reduce trust among the immigrants and the native population. It even reduces and undermines trust among the native population themselves. Now, why would you want to imposition that kind of change on any population? That is morally unjustifiable. The only way you could ever think that it is acceptable to let a fate like this befall any country is if you genuinely hated them and wanted to see their culture go extinct. So no, it is not hateful or ignorant to be opposed to mass immigration. Oh, and you want to talk about hate. You're accusing us right-wingers of being hateful. I'm not gonna take that. Not from leftists. let's get one thing clear. You leftists, you left-wing socialists, however it is you identify on the political spectrum, you are some of the most hateful and intolerant psychopaths on the planet. I've seen what you guys do. I've seen how you behave. Leftists generally, they know that they cannot advocate their own utopian ideals in the context of debate and dialectic because their ideology doesn't stand up to scrutiny. So the only way that they can advance their utopian ideas is if they cow their enemies into silence, typically through violence, through doxing, and through lobbying that literally renders their opponents' views illegal. I've seen what you guys do. You guys punched Richard Spencer in the face while he was walking in New York City. You assassinated Charlie Kirk in broad daylight, surrounded by tens of thousands of students and onlookers. You've severely beaten up activists and investigative reporters, people like Wesley Winters and Young Bob. You beat them up so badly that they ended up in the hospital with a concussion. You started riots in the middle of California when Milo Yiannopoulos was trying to host a university debating tour. So no, I'm not going to accept that we are hateful and you aren't. Not in the least. The only difference between you and I is that we believe in entirely different worldviews. We live according to different principles. We believe the world ought to be run a different way. We recognize the problems that are inherent with our current neoliberal system, and we want a different system. You want a different system, but our idea of how the world ought to be governed is so intolerable to you that you think it's acceptable to physically attack us in the street and celebrate violence against us when it happens. That is hate. None of us do that. We don't believe in assaulting random people in the middle of the street, not unless they'd have to have done something really awful to deserve it. But anyway, that's just not how we play. Mainly, for starters, it goes against our principles, but there's the more practical reason in that the state will clamp down hard on us if we do. We won't be given a pass. We'll get chucked straight to jail, even if we defend ourselves. Anyway, I spent much more time addressing this first point than I needed to. But anyway, the key point I'm trying to get across is that we are not hateful just for having different views, and it's not ignorant to be opposed to mass immigration. Certainly not hateful. I'd much rather be a nerd than a fascist. Look, I'm sorry that I called you a bug-eyed nerd. It wasn't in the spirit of good, friendly debate. I didn't realize we're about to enter debate. I just thought we were going to be trading blows and that would be the end of it. And not going to lie to you, buddy, I've seen your videos. You ain't exactly the anti-nerd yourself. Well, I'm not sure you have, and I will explain why later. Now, next point he makes. You get upset at my comment, but it's a fact you are promoting a far right-wing party. We're not. Well, there's nothing far right. Far right implies so extreme that they are outside the bounds of acceptable political discourse. I put it to you and everyone watching this video, it is not far right to want mass deportations. What is extreme, what is unacceptable, is thinking that it is okay to bring in millions, hundreds of thousands of people without a proper background check into a country in the first place, and thinking that the ordinary people of Britain would accept this, or that they asked for it. That is what's extreme. It's not extreme. It is not extreme to want this injustice, this manifest injustice that's been done to us, to be corrected. A far right-wing party with pseudo-fascist ideas. Why argue against it? Wear it like a badge of honor, like fascists used to, so decent people know just how repugnant you all are. I am not a fascist. I've never once claimed to be a fascist. This is really common among leftists. Leftists, you see, typically, leftists don't make any ideological, meaningful distinction when it comes to people on the right between those who are just moderately right-wing and who want to preserve and retain their cultural identity, with those on the extreme right who want mass executions, or those who want to gas people to death. They are all basically one and the same in their eyes. And there's a bunch of reasons why I fear this happens. Firstly, it's because a lot of leftists aren't that intellectually curious. As far as they're concerned, they have a very limited theory of mind when it comes to the right-wing movements. Anyone who so much as advocates the view that Islam is bad and they should not tolerate Islamic immigration into the West because of how women are treated, or whether they believe that, or whether they believe that all ethnic minorities should be deported or worse, as far as they're concerned, there's no meaningful distinction to be made. Really, that's more of a problem to do with their own theory of mind. And secondly, there's another more disturbing and practical reason why they do this, why they call a lot of their opponents fascists. It is not socially acceptable to be a fascist, to be racist. As I've said earlier, what happens to people who are out and proud fascists or racists? It's not good. They get attacked. They lose their jobs. If they are doxxed, if people find out about their views, they typically lose their jobs. It ruins their lives. People have been kicked out of gyms, pubs, and bars. They've had their lives thrown upside down and humiliated. And a lot of the time, it's not even real fascists that this happens to. It's just ordinary people who express politically incorrect views in a tactless or candid manner about their opinions on ethnic minorities. Terrible things happen to them, but none of that matters if you call them a fascist, because this is an example of dehumanization. By demonizing them, by assigning them a derogatory epithet like fascist, anything is justified when it comes to fascists. You don't reason with fascists, you kill them. That's what leftists often proudly boast about. That's why leftists cheer when people like Richard Spencer are punched in the face. It's why leftists celebrate the death of Charlie Kirk. I mean, for God's sake, Charlie Kirk, he's just somebody who's right-wing, and he was a Zionist too. He was supportive of the state of Israel. Come on, you're telling me that fascists and Nazis believe in the state of Israel? I think Hitler would be pretty disappointed to hear that that's what's happened to his brand. He'd be rolling in his grave if he found out the people who call themselves Nazis, they support the Jews. This is unacceptable. Anyway, the bar has been lowered quite a bit. The standard for being a fascist, I think we can all safely agree, it's been lowered quite some, hasn't it? But anyway, leftists aren't intellectually honest enough to come to acknowledge that there are ideological demarcations in the right wing. They are just happy to use this word to demonize people, to cow their enemies into silence, and to justify and advocate any form of violence or cruelty that befalls them. As I've said, leftists are genuinely unhinged and psychotic. Oh, but let me be clear. I'm not saying that Daniel Watson himself is like this. I'm not trying to say that he is the kind of person who would attack people in the street for having different views. I'm not saying that he happily fantasizes about shooting people dead. I'm happy that I got an opportunity to engage in this sort of dialectic with him. But that is what people of his ilk believe. That is what leftists as a group tend to advocate. It's not something that can be denied at this point. Now let's read the next part. Oh, and lastly, as I've said this before, I'm not a fascist, so I'm not going to go around calling myself a fascist, because that's just not what I am. It's not what I believe. I'm a white nationalist, and I'm a centre-left white nationalist and socialist. Now, the last part. This is the cherry on top. The last part of his comment is just, this is the part that just had me absolutely this part made me do a double take. I was just so stunned as I read this. I couldn't believe what I was reading. You want to restore Britain. To what? To being run by a party of elites who will scapegoat minorities while gutting public services and putting the tax burden on the poorest? Well, no, I don't think you've read up on what Restore Britain's policies really are, but that's not what Restore Britain advocates. Look, we're not interested in scapegoating minorities any more than any sense of blame, any proportional sense of blame that they are rightly owed. Because mass immigration is a weapon, it's a cudgel used by the rich to debase the value of cheap, unskilled workers. It's a known fact that the more people you have in a national economy, the cheaper, the more your GDP goes up, the greater your supply of workers is, and that's why big business supports mass immigration. It floods the market with replaceable cheap labor from people who literally earn less than $1 a day, who are used to putting up with more to earning less. Countries that undergo mass immigration, they lose their ability to unionize because mass immigration fosters resentment and mistrust. It sows division. And if there's division, people can't form unions. People can't bargain for better wages. Certainly not when the logic of living in a buyer's market for work and jobs means jobs are not only harder to come by, but average wages go down. And there's documented proof of this. The Bank of England literally released a paper saying that for every 10% share of workers that gets replaced by immigrants, the average wages decrease by, 1%? I'll have to double check that paper and see. But it's not like that this is a niche talking point. The facts don't lie. Mass immigration hurts the working class, the very people that you leftists claim to be fighting for. Gutting public services and putting the tax burden on poorest. I don't want to gut public services. I don't want to put the tax burden on the poorest. Why would I want that? There are practical... I'm a socialist myself. I believe that taxation is the price we pay for living in a civilization. So I've not got a problem with paying taxes as long as I'm getting value for money. So for instance, I don't mind my taxes being taken from me if they're being used to repair the roads, if they're being used to fund schools and hospitals. Or to fund our armed forces if our country's under threat from a foreign invasion. I'm perfectly happy for my taxes to go towards that. But what I am against, I do have a problem when my taxes are being used to fund foreigners living in our hotels, foreign asylum seekers who've never had so much as a background check, who have deliberately been taught to shed all of their identification and documentations to frustrate the asylum process so they can live rent-free in our taxpayer-funded accommodation. I have a big problem with that. I don't want my tax money going towards that. Think of all the people who deserve it more. Think of all those people who are physically disabled. Like, I'm a care worker, for instance, and all the people who I have to deal with. Those people deserve the taxes more. Or the homeless people who live on the streets. Don't those people deserve it better? I don't know where you get this idea that we want to gut public services and put the tax burden on poorest. And I'm not really that passionate about economics. I'm not that good with numbers. I don't like being in a position where I have to pay more tax than is necessary, but I don't want my taxes being spunked on ridiculous vanity projects that don't serve our people. And Restore Britain, we want to scrap taxes. We want to get rid of IL 35 or ILR 35 or whatever it's called. You should ask Rupert about that. He knows a lot more than I do. We want to realign the tax brackets so that working people can earn more money without falling into the basic income bracket. That would be such a big help to the working classes. It would help working people earn more money. We want to cut council tax. I'm pretty sure we do. I haven't actually read our tax policy, but I do think that that's what we stand for. Rupert Lowe, he's a Thatcherite. He believes in less taxation and smaller government. I mean, if you're interested to find out what he believes, I recommend you take a look. That is, if you're curious enough to watch this video and learn more about where I stand. And why would I... Oh, the next part of this comment is, it's the cherry on top. It's the chef's kiss. So he says, you may be rich enough to afford private healthcare when you get cancer, and these parties have got the NHS to be sold off to the highest bidder, but most cannot. I couldn't believe what I was reading with this. I'm rich enough to afford private healthcare, he says. And the funny thing is, you said earlier on in your comment, Daniel Watson, I've seen your videos, you ain't exactly the anti-nerd yourself. Well, it's pretty clear from this that you haven't seen a lot of my videos. If you had, you'd know I've been public about this. I lost my father to stage 4 melanoma 2 years ago. Yes, to cancer. I lost it. We all lost him. It was a very difficult time for all of us, but we weren't able to get his cancer diagnosed quickly enough. Why? Because the NHS is understaffed and it's overrun by foreign healthcare tourists. And that's why the NHS waiting times are so long. It's not staffed by competent people because we have these ridiculous diversity and inclusion initiatives where we literally just whore out our public services to foreign doctors all around the world, many of whom aren't even qualified. We were able to get private healthcare in the end, but that's only because we had to sacrifice his pension and the mortgage in order to afford it for his immunotherapy and his chemotherapy treatments. And in the end, none of it mattered anyway because we lost him. On the morning of July the 2nd, 2024, we finally lost him. It just, comments like this, they just take the biscuit. I don't know where you are coming out with this. You are just, the politest thing I can say about you, Mr. Watson, is that you know not what you are saying. And why would I want the NHS to be sold off to the highest bidder? I've never wanted that. I'm a socialist. I like the NHS. I think it's a good idea in principle. It's just being run badly. As a matter of fact, I owe my life to the NHS. When I was 19 years old, I woke up one morning and I had this really bad stomach ache. I had this pain in my abdomen and I just kept on vomiting. I kept vomiting again and again, so I had to be admitted to the hospital, and it turned out I had appendicitis. I spent 4 days of pure agony in St. Peter's Hospital, and it took them a while to diagnose the problem eventually, but I could have died. I could have lost my life. And even worse, even if I had survived, if we were living under a different healthcare system like the one that's in the US, I could have ended up being in tens of thousands of pounds worth of debt. But anyway, I owe my life to the NHS. If it weren't for the NHS, I wouldn't have even made it to the age of 20. Why the bloody hell would I want the NHS to be privatised? Who told you that that's what I think? That's not what I believe. And I can't... So no, I'm not opposed to the NHS. There's this bizarre phenomenon in the UK where socialists, they will praise, they've created an entire cult of personality around the NHS. The NHS to most socialists is like their god. We no longer live in a day and age where we worship the Christian God. Now we worship the state and the NHS. I swear, the way that leftists talk about our NHS, it's like There's no other country in the world that has a healthcare model that's anything like it. They say they venerate our holy, sacred NHS, despite the fact that we're spending more money on it than we've ever done at any point in history, and yet the waiting times have never been longer than they are now. I very nearly lost my grandmother at the local hospital on the Isle of Wight. She had gallstones. She had a stroke in the middle of the night. There are so many problems facing our NHS right now, and rightly, those of us in Restore Britain, we want to fix the NHS. We don't want to sell it. We don't want to privatize the NHS. Where did you get that idea from? You may be rich enough to afford private healthcare, he said. And you think that I'm rich enough to afford private healthcare. That's a laugh, honestly. Motherfucker, I work 2 jobs. I work as a care worker and as a pizza delivery man. I'm bloody lucky to have even been able to have gotten 1 job in this day and age, let alone 2. And I can barely earn over £1,000 a month. You think, is that what qualifies as rich in this day and age? Private healthcare is the last thing on my mind. It is a luxury that I can't afford. I'm still trying to pay off my credit card debt because I'm in thousands of pounds worth of credit card debt right now. A lot of my money is being spent on things like rent and fuel, because I don't know if you've noticed, mate, but the price of fuel is through the roof right now. Last I checked, it was 160 pence per litre. This is all being done thanks to our government and their silly net zero policies. We want to scrap that. We've got a whole policy paper on net zero. So if we scrap net zero, this would help a lot of people who are in my position, who are in the position where they're spending so much unnecessary cash on energy bills and on fuel costs. You may be happy to scapegoat this country's problems on the downtrodden, much like every fascist has done in history, but decent people do not. My brother in Christ, I am the downtrodden. I work 2 jobs. I'm technically homeless. We have a house, but we can't live in it because there are building works being done to it, and we've had to mortgage the house because we can't afford the building works anymore. I don't even have my own bedroom anymore. I share a lounge on a sofa bed with my brother. My life has never been this bad. I'm not saying that I have it worse than anybody else. I'm sure that there are people who have much harder lives than I do in this country. But God, life is it just feels like everything is weighing and crushing you down in this modern economy. This is not an acceptable, the way things are in this country right now, this is just not acceptable. Things need to change. Desperate times call for desperate measures. People shouldn't be living like this, not in a first world country. We should not be living in a day and age where you have to make budgetary decisions over whether you can afford to go out and meet friends and socialize at the pub or stay indoors to save money. We shouldn't be having to make budgetary decisions about whether we want to go and enjoy a coffee or have a drink or have a snack or stay in and save money. That's just not how things should be. You may want to aid and abet this country further, contributing to an oncoming climate crisis, I think he means crisis, that could decimate this country's ecosystem and create far more of the immigrants that you detest so much, but decent people don't. How is the climate crisis and mass immigration, how are these things related? I don't understand. I don't think you understand either. Look, I'm sympathetic to the climate crisis. I do think we should try to be green wherever possible, but net zero is just not economically sustainable for us. It's put so many communities of people in this country out of work, it's levied so many unnecessary taxes on working people and made their lives harder. And not to mention the situation with regards to, with regards to Ukraine and the supply of natural gas and of course, oil and the Strait of Hormuz. Most of our energy source comes from natural gas and oil, and both of them are vulnerable to supply shocks, which has made life a lot more difficult for ordinary people like myself. So I don't know why you think I'm opposed to that. I want life to be easier for everyone. And we could do that if we scrap net zero. Anyway, he ends this by saying, "Thank God for decent people, and it's not too late to try and be one." Well, thanks, respectfully, thank you, but I happen to think that I'm a decent enough person. Well, I never claim to be a decent person. It's just I don't think my views are unreasonable. And really, my friend Daniel Watson 7915, if the beliefs that I've expressed, if the views and opinions I've espoused in this video make me qualified to be a fascist, to be a far-right racist and a Nazi, well, you're going to lose your mind when you talk with ordinary people in a place like Makerfield. Because there are more people who share these views than you're happy to admit. I swear, you're probably, if these opinions make me a fascist, probably well over half the country is fascist by these standards. Are you going to accuse half the country of being fascist and far-right bigots? Or are you going to take a moment to stop, look at yourself in the mirror, and ask yourself, what do I actually believe? What is actually the best way to help working people? What do I stand for, and what do they stand for? Is going around calling people fascists simply for having different opinions, is that really the right way to go about things? Something to think about. Anyway, this video went on way longer than I planned it to. I'm sorry that I insulted you by calling you a bug-eyed freak. I didn't realize that you were curious enough to delve a little further and explore what my views are. In the spirit of debate and candor, I don't have any hatred in my heart for you as a person. But all the same, I'm not going to renounce or apologize for my beliefs. My views are shaped by my life experiences and my perception of reality. If you're trying to demonize my views, you're basically trying to erase my life history and say it never happened or that it doesn't matter. And I'm certainly not going to change it, not unless somebody persuades me with a very convincing argument that my beliefs actually don't help the working class and that actually there is a way that we can somehow improve conditions for working people without mass deportations, or that you can become materially much more successful through immigration somehow, something ridiculous like that. That's certainly not what I believe, and I don't think it's likely you will convince me, but I'm all ears, you know. I'm open to further debate and discussion on this matter. Anyway, this has been Tracking. You guys take care. Cheerio, everyone.